All right, Dad, we're in Milwaukee for Passover, and I know it's your favorite holiday,
Right.
but I thought the question was about the history of kosher food in America. And you think you have sort of a unique perspective being in the kosher food distribution side of the business. You've
Hmm.
seen quite a lot of change in
Hmm.
the industry. And it'd be kind of interesting to hear some of your thoughts on that.
Well, I was actually a newcomer into the kosher food distributing, and I probably started um, about 1980 after we had a good food distributing business going, in which we had all kinds of ethnic foods. But there were kosher distributors. I think the very first full kosher distributor was in Cincinnati, the A.B. Wise Company. Probably started in the early 1900s. How they made a living is beyond me because kosher food was not distributed very widely, nor were there very many kosher food products for grocery stores in those days. I know that they were good friends of the Manischewitz family, and I believe Manischewitz started in Cincinnati before they moved to New York. And um, but by the time we got into kosher foods, there were an awful lot, and I do awful lot of products for the supermarkets. And I do recall, however, before we started handling products like Manischewitz and Kedem and others, uh, I found it rather easy to convince a grocer to put in an item that had a kosher symbol on it. For instance, before Nabisco had a kosher symbol on their products, uh, we had a kosher symbol on our saltines, on a lot of our cookies, and that was a strong point with selling the product to get it on the grocer's shelf. And it was nice being unique. Eventually, as other manufacturers saw the kosher symbol to be important, they put it on, and eventually Nabisco, who was by far the largest cookie and cracker company, started putting kosher symbols on a lot of their products. And I do remember when they finally put the kosher symbol on the Oreo. What an incredible hit that made to the not only the kosher community, but for Nabisco's sales in general. I recall hearing one Nabisco executive say that their Oreo, which was the largest selling single cookie in America, went up 20% in the New York area just by the kosher symbol. Um, but I do remember clearly in my days of kosher seeing individual supermarkets really playing up kosher in a very big way. Um, and today, that's still happening where a kosher supermarket, and I remember seeing one in Kansas City, a Hen House, Albertsons around the country, Jewel, and now finally in little old Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a supermarket that is really catering to the kosher consumer, where they will have not just a huge gondola with maybe a good thousand kosher Jewish ethnic items, but they will have a dairy section with kosher milk. Even though most milk has a kosher symbol, they would like to have a section of Chol Israel milk, which is watched a little more carefully, and the Orthodox community, many people want that kind of milk. And they'll have a dairy section. Some will even have a deli where you can get sliced meat, a kosher bakery. And so I have seen the development of kosher foods in supermarkets, sometimes to the detriment of the little kosher store that existed in a particular market. Although kosher stores can still survive very nicely, where uh, Mom and I are in the wintertime in southeast Florida, where there's an incredible number of Jewish people, especially in the wintertime. And for some strange reason, a higher proportion of Jews that keep kosher down in southeast Florida. Just wonderful, pure kosher stores, grocery stores that are competing very successfully against the supermarket. Um, um, and in small markets like Milwaukee with 20,000 Jews and maybe only 10% are kosher 24/7. Even Milwaukee can now have a supermarket that really goes out of its way to present kosher foods in a beautiful way. In fact, they're considering a kosher sushi bar. They have a sushi bar, and they're now considering breaking that in half and having one section kosher.
So why? So 30 years ago, when you started to bring kosher to the retailer, what was the attraction? If there's only 20,000 Jews, what's the attraction of kosher?
Well, they all wanted a small kosher section. So we were putting in 4-foot sections, maybe if it was in a highly Jewish area, which meant 10% of the population was Jewish, they might go to 8-foot sections where you could put maybe up to 100 varieties of ethnic kinds of products, and matzah meal, a lot of soup bases, and even candles, yahrzeit candles, and Shabbos candles would be in the department. And the truth of the matter was, years ago, that 40% of the sales was during the Passover season. Mm-hmm. And so, in non-Passover season, excuse me, the products sold very slowly. But I think the supermarkets saw it as necessary because there were other products in the store that was kosher. Obviously, produce is kosher, and so if the Jewish consumer knew they could get yahrzeit candles at the supermarket, they didn't go there just for yahrzeit candles. They bought all the other items in the store that were either on purpose or accidentally kosher. And so there were sales to be made just by having that small section. I think slowly the supermarkets realized there was a little more potential. Now, did the market grow, the kosher market grow? I think a little bit. I don't think it grew dramatically, but I can see in Milwaukee, having lived here all my life, that there's far more kosher consumers, people that are keeping kosher, and it's not limited just to Orthodox. I think in the non-Orthodox area there are people that are now keeping kosher. Some might keep kosher a little better than others, but they're interested in kosher products. I think another thing with all of the problems and recalls in the food market, as food is made and transferred further and further away, and companies are, in their attempt to make a profit, might be rushing a lot of their production. There's been more and more recalls. And I think the consumer, certainly the kosher consumer and maybe the non-kosher consumer, might think of the kosher symbol as what the Good Housekeeping seal of approval was years and years ago. And at least another pair of eyes watching the production. Whether that's factual or not, I don't know, but I think there's a perception that kosher foods are maybe a little more pure. I certainly think in meat, even though some might question the slaughtering process, the fact that an animal with some kind of lesion or some kind of problem is eliminated for being kosher, I think, and I could be wrong here, but I don't know. I've never heard of a recall in kosher meat. I've heard about an awful lot of recalls in non-kosher meat. That there's probably some basis in fact that you're a little more safe with kosher products. So I think that's helped a little. And of course, people that are medically directed are lactose intolerant. Is that correct? Um, with the products that have no dairy in it, anybody that that's allergic to dairy understands those symbols and looks for them. So there certainly has been growth, and I think supermarkets have recognized that fact and are now presenting kosher foods in a beautiful area in their stores.
And what about the changes in the Heckscher symbols that you've seen over the years?
There's a book called Kosher that when I first started getting that book 25 years ago, there were a couple hundred symbols. Every year that number grew, and it's now over 1,000 symbols. Are they all respected? Not all, but more than 90% are. And so every community generally where there's a relatively significant amount of Jewish people has a local symbol. It might be the local VOD, and generally they're respected, and they work with the local manufacturers to see if they can make the product kosher. And in many cases it's a very, very simple, easy process, and many products may be kosher automatically, just never knew it. And so all it requires is for the person the rabbi or whoever who has the symbol, to go in and check and verify that no non-kosher ingredients are brought into the plant, and they get their symbol on the product.
All right, thanks. Well, the last question, what about quinoa for Passover? Kosher or not?
I like the OU statement on it. Until we find a rabbi that'll climb the hills of Bolivia to check it out, we cannot verify whether it's kosher for Passover or not. So find somebody to climb the mountains.
All right, thanks, Dad.